Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our bi-weekly podcast where we talk about medical device cybersecurity. My name is Colin Duggan. I'm the CEO and a co-founder of BG Networks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roman Lysecki, CTO and co-founder for BG Networks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Pettis, BG Networks Medical Device Cybersecurity Services Lead.
We start this podcast every couple of weeks that we hold it with news and the news that we have this week is about a new threat and risk analysis tool that is from first principles based on artificial intelligence large language models. And generally in the industry, huge advancements have been made with AI LLMs. But I think that we're just scratching the surface of what these tools can do in terms of the useful work that they can be applied to. And there's been a number of areas such as general purpose conversational AI assistance, most famously ChatGPT. Customer service applications is another area where AI LLMs have proven to be useful. Legal applications where legal briefs can be summarized with exact results without making any mistakes. Amazingly, helping doctors diagnose disease for medical conditions that are complicated and maybe things that they don't see very often. And then certainly coding. And what we have found is we think we have here another great application of AI LLMs for threat and risk assessments for medical devices. We found that they do an amazing job. And what we're going to do today is show you a demo so you can actually see real time this threat and risk assessment tool that we call Aithra, creating the outputs for a threat and risk assessment. The demo takes about 40 minutes. It'll take us through step by step a FDA aligned threat and risk assessment process. We're going to show an example, and the example is going to be based on MITRE's and MDIC's playbook for threat modeling medical devices. And as we go here, we're going to try to answer your questions, make it more interactive, make it more interesting. So put your questions in the chat as they come to mind. And if we can't answer them during the presentation, kind of as we go, we'll answer them at the end. And Roman, do you mind starting the demo?
Absolutely. Yeah, very excited to be here today, introducing you to our tool, Aithra. We've been using this internally for many months now to help a lot of our customers with threat and risk assessments. And so we're very excited to be able to launch this to have broader usage here. So this is Aithra, our tool. And really the first input and the only input that's required for this is a set of documents that you already have describing your system. This could be early design phases where you don't even know the security that's required, or it could be in the later design phases where you actually have some security requirements. You can upload PDFs, drawings, images, architectures of your system. I'm going to upload here. This is the PDF for the AMPS device, which comes from that MITRE playbook. What it's doing right now is it's parsing, extracting the information from that. And while it does that in the background, I'm going to switch over to a different screen to actually show you what that document looks like. So you can actually see exactly what we're providing as input to the system. And that's the example that I'm showing here. This is the from the playbook for threat modeling of medical devices. It's called the Ankle Monitor Predictor of Strokes. And so what we've done here is extract it out from there, exactly just the description of the system. So high-level description of what the system does, an example here of a core use case of where it would be utilized. At a very high level, the core technologies, which is a BLE-based ankle monitor that communicates with an app. That app displays reading and communicates with the cloud, and then the cloud has the capability for a physician to communicate or to look at the results within the system. It then goes into a further description of the AMPS device. So you can see there's a stroke predicting sensor on this. There's a heart rate monitor, body temperature, BLEs, and various components that are provided. We have a basic overview of the patient app that runs on the system. There's an Android version and an Apple iOS version. Well, we won't go through all those details, but it's a basic overview of what it does, how it operates, along with the cloud services that are part of the system that allows the access to there. Beyond that, we have some drawings of the system. So we will extract out these drawings. Every figure that's in the document will be extracted. This is a high-level overview just showing the three main components, how it connects. And then we have further details here and here provided, which for the devices, it's showing the actual sensors and ports that are on the device. For the phone, it's what interfaces and communication is necessary. The cloud, we're looking at different databases that are used, backend services, and then the clinician computer at the HDO for accessing the device. And that's it. That's the entire document that we're providing as input to the system. We can kind of switch back over as it's processed and actually get into the threat and risk assessment.
Yeah, and Roman, I'll add, and just like you said, is Aithra will take as input both block diagrams and text descriptions of your system. And like Roman mentioned, we've been using it internally for the last 6 months, helping customers prepare for 510Ks with cybersecurity information that Aithra would generate. And this is a big difference. This is how the workflow has changed, in that you're providing descriptions, block diagrams, and you're just dragging and dropping like Roman showed. And so, over this time, we haven't had to draw any security specific diagrams. We're not using a Microsoft threat modeling tool. We're not worrying about creating security stencils or objects or catalogs or libraries, associating threats with those objects and security controls with each. We don't do any of that. It's amazing. It's all done by the AI, the LLMs. It's built in the AI, and Aithra does an amazing job at identifying those assets, creating the threats, and so on through the process, as we'll show here in the demo.
Let me switch back to Aithra. And so now that it's processed that PDF, we have the generate report capability. So I'm going to go ahead and generate that. This is a multi-step process that we're following. So using LLMs, we've built a systematic approach to do the threat and risk assessment. And it very closely and importantly aligns with our approach for how we do threat and risk assessments as part of a secure product development framework, an SPDF, and how that ties in with a quality management system you have in place for your medical device. And so we'll talk about what those interconnections are. The first task that Aithra is doing here is it's extracting various information, looking at generally the system diagram to illustrate the kind of understanding of all the components that we've identified from the system, looking at that flow of data, because that data flow will identify our communication interfaces, and that's part of the threats we need to be able to consider. It's part of what the attack paths we need to be thinking about as well. And then the first thing we're going to do is an asset list. So it's going to analyze the system to identify any of the assets that were explicitly listed within that system, within the input documents that were provided. But it'll also look for common interfaces and identify, for this cloud connection, you didn't explicitly say you were using TLS for securing the interface, but we can infer from the description that it is in place. And so we'll have we need to have the appropriate certificates that are part of that communication. So it'll infer and put the intelligence into identifying a holistic view of the assets within the system. So we're trying to be very comprehensive in what's provided.
Great, thanks, Roman. And I think that what you're seeing here as the assets are being generated, one of the aspects of Aithra, or a couple aspects, is that it's very comprehensive. And as we go through this, and as you see the threats it generates and the risks it generates a lot of information. And compared to when I would do a threat and risk assessment by hand, it generates a much more comprehensive list of all aspects of the threat and risk assessment than I actually would do. And it's now taken the workflow from being one where you'd have to sit and think using Stride, what are the assets, what are the threats, and so on. And now it's about review, where you're not having to take that time, that very difficult, time-consuming task of, oh, geez, what are the threats and did I catch them all? Aithra does that for you. And the task now is to actually go back and review and see, are the results correct, and are they what is expected? And that is why there's just a huge time savings here. Over the course of working with the tool, we feel like it's about 90% correct. It is AI, it does hallucinate, so it's not 100%. But we think that 90% is great, and we found in our experience of using the tool, at 90%, it's absolute huge time saver.
And we can see here from the asset, so it'll display the results as it's being produced. And then at the very end, we'll show the export that will have a spreadsheet provided export. And so it's going to be pretty comprehensive in what it's analyzing. So it's looking for hardware components, software components, looking for any data that's stored within the system. So you can see that it's identified the various sensors here that were part of the system, the stroke predicting sensor, heart rate monitors. It's identified BLE connections, application services, kind of all of these things you would commonly infer. But it's also looking at data, saying, okay, if you have a cloud-based infrastructure, there is PII and PHI that is stored in the cloud, and that's important for protecting as well. It's looking for, okay, if you have a firmware update system, there's also data packages that it's going to be in place to do that. So it's looking fairly comprehensively across the assets that you need within your system. What it will then do is the threat assessment. So once you have your assets identified, the next step in our process for doing threat and risk assessments is to look at the threat scenarios that are involved against those various assets. So we can look for things even at the point of physical tampering to the device. That would affect any of those physical assets that we had, and it'll do a stride analysis of that. And so you can see then for firmware tampering against a attack targeting the computing device of the firmware. So that's going to be looking at the sensor itself, the firmware that's on that sensor, and specifically a tampering type attack against those components of the system. So it's using Stride. We found Stride is a very useful approach for doing our threat and risk assessment, because it does kind of categorize them out in terms of the threats, and that allows us connects in with the remaining steps of our process.
And you can see from the assets and the threats that Aithra will handle different types of, or the different parts of your system. So it works with medical IoT devices. It works with iPhone apps, Android apps. It works with the cloud. It does a very good job with all three those are the most typical types we see, and certainly SAMD. It also does a good job for SAMD-based medical products.
And so after the threat scenarios have been identified, we want to look for, so those are really just the threats. What should we be considering as possible threats against our system? Based upon those threats and the assets that are involved, we then want to look at what we call the damage scenarios. So the damage scenarios are looking for, okay, if a threat actually results in affecting my system, what's the potential damage and the resulting consequence that could come up from there? So if we look at one example here, is if you looked at physically trying to find the firmware example, but let me just grab one here in the middle. If you're able to tamper with the heart rate monitor, so if you have a firmware update or you tamper with the firmware with the system, and that leads to their heart rate monitor reporting incorrect vital diagnosis, that will compromise the overall patient monitoring. So that ties in really with the effectiveness of the device, and that's going to be a critical component of that. So the damage scenarios are done in 2 steps. The first is to identify the damage scenarios, and then the second step will be to look at what's the actual impact of those damage scenarios, actually rate them in terms of various categories.
Yeah, and when we look at the damage impact from a safety perspective, it is required that you go and grab your hazard analysis or your DFEMA on the safety side, which will exist, because we want to ensure that the threat and risk assessment uses the same language that's used in the hazard analysis. And so the hazard analysis or DFEMA will inform the spreadsheet in terms of language and the extent of the impact. They have to align.
And so Aithra will generate an initial assessment of safety. You can see for each of those damage scenarios, it's generating an assessment. It's putting a description of what that initial requirement was. But as Eric mentioned, it's important that those are reviewed and aligned with how you're rating the safety, because that's ultimately what you're going to need in your risk evaluation for an FDA submission.
Yeah, the way we're ranking the impacts and also the threats is using NIST 800-30. And as was being shown before, it's moved on now to the, I think, but as was being shown before, there is ratings not only for safety, but also for data privacy. FDA doesn't require controls in 510Ks for data privacy. They're focused on safety and operational availability of devices. Are they available to treat the patient? We look at as a safety related issue. So safety and operational together impact overall safety. But you also want to look at data privacy at the same time, because this is the first step in creating your security controls. And you don't want to create a set of security controls only focused on safety to realize later, the data is not protected, and there'll be other regulations out there, whether it's GDPR in Europe or HIPAA in the United States, that are going to need to be complied with from a data privacy perspective. And then we also have financial in there. And financial is about information for the medical device company, really to highlight is there financial risk to the medical device company. And we think that's quite valuable, because that can lead to security controls that can help, protect reputations, limit lawsuits, these sort of things. So that's why we have not only safety, but we also have these other categories around operational privacy and financial in here.
And a lot of the customers that we work with, ultimately safety is what connects it back into your QMS for your FDA submission. But these other considerations are still very important from the company's perspective, that they will look for what security controls do we need in place to mitigate those. It's not purely a safety, but that doesn't mean your security only has to be related to safety. It's taking a more holistic view of that. And a lot of the companies we work with will add in additional controls there, particularly around things like reputational harm and safeguarding those. So this is...
Hey, Roman, we have our first question that came in here. Do you want to answer this now, or do you want to do it in a moment?
Oh, yes, we can answer it now. I'm sharing my screen. Do you want to read the question?
Yeah, sure. The question is, the person's curious about how updates may be handled. This is a good question. They start out with a set of documentation at time 1 that I upload. Then the documentation gets updated, or I have more product documentation later. Can I subsequently upload that recent documentation or how does it manage and handle the updates, or does it generate a brand new assessment? Great question. This is the thing with, for instance, coding in AI. They call it, like, sometimes you just throw everything away and you re-roll. But here we've designed Aithra so that it's going through each of these steps here. And if you generate the assets, you can freeze the assets. If you generate the threats, you can freeze the threats. And this is one way that you can actually build upon what you have already. Roman, do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that this is absolutely a use case. There's many touch points that you would need to rerun. You might find later a vulnerability that you didn't consider. Your software might have a vulnerability in library. You need to reassess that. And that reassessment, you would want to be able to do an update of that as well. Software updates, you'd have to update that process too. So we're looking at having an approach that allows you to take an existing assessment, provide that as an input. So you're starting from what you already have and then build upon that. So that's absolutely one of the use cases that we commonly do, and one that will be supported by the tool.
Yeah, and it's our expectation, and I mean, this is what we do when we're performing work for a full kind of 510K cybersecurity information preparation, is you're touching the threat and risk assessment multiple times. Ideally, you're doing it in the beginning. You do it again after you do your SBOM analysis. There may be vulnerabilities that come out of the SBOM analysis that you want to go and evaluate in your threat and risk assessment process. After you do your pen testing, you're going to want to go back to the threat risk assessment again. And then after you look at your unresolved anomalies, features that may impact cybersecurity, you'll want to run those through the threat and risk assessment again. And the FDA is going to expect you to do that if you're making a case, or even to not fix because you're going to say they don't impact, or even if you're going to put a mitigation in to justify what the mitigation is, you're going to want to have that threat and risk assessment evaluation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when you look at how this ties in to the overall risk management process, and we've talked about that in previous shows, you're going to identify your mitigations, you're going to recalculate your residual risk, and if there are risks that are still high or very high, they will be dispositioned in accordance with your safety risk management process, and you'll move on to your risk benefit ratio. But it's typical that every line item that has a safety risk, regardless of the residual risk level, typically gets transferred over into your safety risk management file.
Roman, we have another question, but why don't we continue on the tools moving forward here? We'll catch up a little bit with the tool, and then we can go back to the question.
Perfect. And so the next step here was looking at the attack path. So once you have the damage scenarios tell you, like, what's the potential damages that occur, particularly around patient safety, what the impacts, evaluate the impacts of those. But then we also need to look for, in terms of our risk, it's not just the impact of the damage scenario that we're concerned about, it's what's the exploitability of an attack that would result in those damage scenarios. And that's what we call attack path analysis. So we're looking at, given the architecture of the system, we're trying to say, for every damage scenario that's out there, look for potential entry points into the system. If you find those potential entry points, then look for an analysis of the attack path. What are the steps an attacker would need to do to essentially have that damage scenario occur? And then once we have the attack path, we want to evaluate the exploitability of that attack. And so that's what you're seeing here in this output. You're looking at the exploitability, and it's really these 5 categories that go into determining an exploitability for an attack. The elapsed time is, how long does it take to actually develop the attack itself? Do I need to write custom software to do some operations to develop, and how long would it take me to develop that software? You have the expertise. What level of expertise is required for the attack? Can a layman do it just by following some script and get in? Or do you really need deep expertise of how a JTAG interface works? What knowledge is required? So is it only publicly available knowledge that you put on your website, or does it require some confidential information that would only be known if you have access to restricted information? Window of opportunity is for the attack itself. How easy is it to do there? Do I need to be inside a locked room with somebody actively communicating, or can I just be generally sitting in my office and it's a cloud interface I can get to? How easy is it to get access to do the attack, and then what level of equipment? Standard equipment, or do I need some specialized bespoke tool that I've created? So all of those are evaluated given the attack path. That produces an exploitability rating, and that's going to come together when we look at the risk analysis.
Great. And I just add that those descriptions of exploitability or those characteristics used for rating, they're CVSS-like. You'll find it's a little bit different, but you'll find similar sorts of characteristics that need to be rated when NIST is calculating a CVSS score for the NIST vulnerability database. And the other thing we find is that you need a good detailed description of the attack path, because that's needed to make sure that you can actually rate it properly. If the attack path is not detailed enough, you won't be able to rate it correctly. So we found that Aithra does a very nice job. You'll see there's 4 or so steps in the attack path for every threat that we have.
And so then the next, after that, this is where it comes together. So let me scroll through. There's 60 some odd attack paths that we have in here. And it's going to come together here in the risk assessment. So with the risk assessment, it's doing 2 things. So one, it's looking at the combination of the impact rating. So that's your overall impact. It's looking at the attack exploitability. And I think that it's important to note that exploitability is a more appropriate way to view this. You can't use things like probability or likelihood. It doesn't work for security assessment for the FDA, but exploitability gives you the ability to rate that. The combination of those 2 yield a risk value that then determines, do I need to mitigate this risk? And so what Aithra will provide is it will also provide a suggested treatment description. This isn't a requirement. I think this is one of the other connections into your QMS and your overall SPDF, your product development framework, which is, given these risks, what are actually the requirements that you're going to put in place to do the mitigation. So there are suggestions provided, but ultimately that needs to then be converted into your requirements with the connections into your traceability requirements management system. When this all runs, you have a download option. So this is right now the primary output. We will get a spreadsheet. So I'm going to download that and open that spreadsheet up and switch my screen over to share that one.
While Roman's doing that, I'll answer the question that came in. This is the right time to answer that question, and that's the reason for waiting. Question is, what is the workflow for correcting inaccuracies in Aithra? Do you work with the model to correct the assumptions? And you actually correct it in the spreadsheet here. So this is where you'll actually review the outputs from Aithra and actually correct anything that you find to be inaccurate. So be directly just in an Excel spreadsheet. This is the output that you have from this spreadsheet. We have a documentation set that you can take that information out of the spreadsheet, and that would give you, directly documents from eStar. And just before we leave the risks, Roman, Eric, do you mind talking about the overall risk process? This is an area you know well, and we've talked a little bit about it before a couple of weeks ago on the podcast here.
Yeah, I mean, risk management is risk management. No matter what you're doing it for, it's really all the same. So, we've got the attack path, the threat, we've got the impacts. The exploitability is strategic in the spreadsheet and the Aithra tool. and you come up with a rating. And it's either going to be a very low, low, moderate, high, or very high. Mitigations required for anything moderate or above. We recalculate our residual risk. And then anything that's high or very high requires a risk-benefit ratio. That's going to happen on the safety side in the risk management file. And as I said before, every line item that has a safety impact, regardless of the level, will be ported over into your safety side risk management file and be dispositioned there. So it's just standard risk management.
A couple other quick questions came in here. What security risk standard does it comply with? So we base this on SW96 from Amy. This is the combination of maybe its more famous progenitors, TIR 57 and TIR 97. Those were both, those two documents were kind of recommendations. SW96 is the cybersecurity risk management process for medical devices, which is actually a full process. The other question was, how's the score calculated? Do you mind explaining that, Roman?
Yeah, absolutely. So the score calculation is based upon, ultimately it will be generated based upon a matrix, and that's produced in the output as well. So if you have a different matrix, that can be updated as well as an input. So it's really looking at a combination of that exploitability and the impact rating, and then producing a final risk rating of a 1 to 5 scale. And this would be based usually with most customers we work with, 3 and above is the unmanaged risks, the ones that will need some level of mitigations in place. Whereas if you have a risk that's 2 or below, that would usually be the category saying that this is a managed risk. This is acceptable level of residual risk within the system. So this can be updated here as part of that implementation if you need to have a different assessment. The spreadsheet that's generated, everything's connected together. So if you need to do reviews or edit things, such as, okay, I want to change the asset description. You change that asset description, it will propagate through the other sheets within the system. They're all connected together. So you can make edits here that will propagate through. So from the asset identification to the threat scenarios, to your damage scenarios, and then ultimately, so this is one of the places where we talked about making sure the safety ratings, the overall impact rating aligns with your safety rating you're using for your QMS. So this is one of the cases where this has to be reviewed and updated to make that alignment happen. Once it's updated here, it will propagate into this final risk analysis. And that's then looking at, okay, here's the primary asset involved, the threat scenario involved, the damage scenario, the attack path that was identified with all of the steps provided. This is the attack exploitability score. They gave us our very high exploitability rating. And then the risk management description came here, where I look at the impact is high. The attack exploitability was very high. That's 4. That means that we need to mitigate this. And that's kind of that starting point for that implementation. So it all connects together here, and it can be easily updated. Calculations are automatically done in the exported sheet. So you can the goal here is to make the spreadsheet where you can fine tune the results of Aithra very efficiently to be able to then connect in with your other processes. And we found many of the customers we work with, they utilize spreadsheets very heavily for tracking these things. And so we wanted to adopt a model that was easy to integrate with that type of approach.
Yeah, and based upon the Aithra suggested mitigations, the residual risk is calculated in part of the spreadsheet, just answering one of the questions. So it is in the spreadsheet.
Yeah, Roman, maybe you could show that, because
Yes.
the question is so the risk value is pre-mitigated rating, correct? Where do you assess residual risk for each threat attack path after you've mitigated?
Right, and so here is where you can track risk control ID using so we want the traceability, so there would be identifying this as a risk that could be tied with your QMS to track the risk control ID. You can specify for producing traceability, identify the security control requirements that you have in place for mitigating that risk, and then we can reassess the attack path. So there's placeholders in here for reassessing what the exploitability would be for that attack. And that will update the attack exploitability score. That will propagate into a risk value, which hopefully then sufficiently mitigated that level of risk to the point that it's now controlled. You can track that you have the right implementations in place. So now you can identify ultimately here, that's the residual risk once your security controls are in place.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question. Why not use CVSS? I'll take that one. The main reason is CVSS focuses on confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It doesn't focus on safety. So there's some other reasons, but that's the main reason why we don't use CVSS. We want those impact ratings around safety and operational availability primarily, and that's unique, I think, from CVSS.
And I see there was another question about the reassessment. It is currently a manual process for doing that reassessment. Ultimately, if you have the controls in place, we'll want this reassessment to be automated by Aithra, so you can get the attack exploitability automatically reassessed given those security controls that are in place. So that's a feature coming on the roadmap, currently a manual process.
Great. The next question is this a subscription-based tool, or what is the cost? So it is subscription-based. It's an annual license. And what I'll say about the cost is that we priced it so that you save money if there's only one threat and risk assessment you do per year. So the cost is much less than, if you put an hourly rate against your 80 to 100 hours for doing a threat risk assessment. If you do two, then you're saving a lot more money every subsequent one that you do. But like I said, we wanted to make sure that, even if somebody just wanted to use this for one threat and risk assessment per year, a small company that had only one device that they were sending out the door per year, that there would be a substantial cost savings. And then, if it's a larger company and there's multiple threat and risk assessments, the savings will be even greater. So, if you want specific pricing, please contact us. We would be happy to give you that pricing.
And Colin, you mentioned 80 to 100 hours, and I think that's in reference to we do a lot of these assessments very manually in the past, and for a system of a similar complexity, having an embedded device with multiple sensors communicating with Bluetooth to an app, and the app having a cloud-based interface as well. So a device roughly of that category, to do a threat and risk assessment from scratch manually, it takes about 80 to 100 hours to perform the assessment and do the review of that assessment. What we found with Aithra is by taking the generated output from Aithra, it takes, everything needs to be reviewed. So we want to comprehensively review the assets, make sure they're accurate, review the threat scenarios, determine those are the threats that we're actually concerned about, examine the damage scenarios, do that update for your safety rating, your overall rating is going to fit into your risk assessment, do the assessment, the final kind of review of the risk assessments, and even look at the mitigations to make sure they're generally the right mitigations. That process, using what the Aithra produces as an output, takes about 8 to 10 hours to do. So it's about a day of work to do that assessment. And that really, for us, is where we see that efficiency gain in doing the threat risk assessment. So it's taking 80 to 100 hours and making that 8 to 10 hours. So it's about 10x faster to do a threat risk assessment of the same level of quality.
One other point before we go to the next question here that I just wanted to make too is when the phone rings for us and, a customer is looking for some help getting the cybersecurity information together for a 510K, it's very rare that it's at the beginning of the process. It's like 9 times out of 10, the devices in mid-design or already is at the end of the design. And, there's an FDA submission that's a month away. And so one nice feature, especially for smaller companies, is that this makes it very easy in the beginning to get an understanding about what are the security controls required. So those threat mitigations, those security controls give you a really, really good idea in the beginning of what's needed in the device. Now, they do need to be reviewed, right? And they need to be confirmed, like we've been saying. But it really helps in the beginning to say, geez, we need to allocate this much processing power and memory in the IoT device. Or, geez, we need to make sure this time's in the schedule so that we can add those security features in. So right from the beginning, even without a whole lot of evaluation, even by a cybersecurity expert, you're going to get a good idea of the sort of security you need by running this and taking a look at that column in the spreadsheet that is the threat mitigation column.
And in addition to the tool, we also have created what we call smart templates. So eStar requires the cyber deliverables to be uploaded to FDA's site. And as I said, we have a template for each deliverable. It's smart in the sense that in blue text, it tells you what blanks to fill in that are specific to your device and your company. And those are available as well.
Great. The recording will be available. It will be on YouTube. And just to answer that question quickly. And then, Roman, here's one for you. I'm not exactly sure of the answer to this one. So you can subsequently feed in your software requirements that contain some of the controls. And would that get applied to the risk controls?
Yes, I would say right now that those connections are manually done. So you can track the security controls, do the reassessment. This is one of the features on our roadmap to be able to take the controls and automatically reassess what's the attack feasibility given the controls that you have in place to mitigate that threat.
Here is the next steps and contact information. So if you're interested, let us know. We can send you the output that Roman showed, that spreadsheet output from the MITRE MDIC playbook for threat modeling example called AMPS. And so you can see what Aithra generated today. If you'd like a demo for Aithra, we can do that, answer your questions. The other thing we're offering is if you wanted to get an idea how Aithra would work for your particular device, we'll do a starter threat and risk assessment. We would evaluate something like the first 5 threats or something in that range for you. If you give us just a little bit of information about your device, and then you can get a sense of how Aithra would work for the particulars of your device. And you can see the contact information there on the slide. I also put my contact information in the LinkedIn chat, and you can get it out of there.
Yeah, and I just wanted to thank you all for joining us here today as we launched Aithra. We're very excited about. We've been internally using the tool, so I'm particularly excited to see kind of our efforts and the benefit that we've seen ourselves using it, and hopefully you're interested to take a look, and we can help you in your threat risk assessments as well.
I think that's it, Eric. Any final thoughts here?
The only final thought is I couldn't imagine doing a threat and risk assessment without an automated tool. Now that we have one.
Now that we have one, I can't imagine it either.
I can't imagine.
So, yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you, everyone. Quick word on our biweekly podcast. We do this every Thursday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. And we've been going through the FDA guidance step by step. You can find that on YouTube. You can find it on LinkedIn. It's under the live streams on YouTube. And I forget the topic we've got for next week. But obviously we're in the threat and risk assessment section, and I think it might be pen testing might be the topic.